Welcome everyone. Today we have another new episode, and this episode we're going to discuss on this manufacturing industry. And this manufacturing industry actually very important for Asia Pacific. We have our new guest, Mr. David. So hopefully he's going to introduce himself with his academic and career background. We have our famous analyst, Mr. Rob, and our famous professor, Professor Donalds, becomes every day. I'm really happy. I getting too much of call from the planning ministry, from different advisory board, different corporation, university. They like their analysis, their guideline, their strategy, and everybody actually calling me how they can do these technology things and other things. And I want to give you a good news from May. We want to start our academy as well as our summit. So hopefully different corporations, different university, government organization, they will get more support from our scholars, like from Professor Donalds, Mr. Rob, and we have our new guest. Hopefully in the future he's going to join in our teams. And also we have another guest from our Malaysia, from Penang, right? Mr. HF Chong. So I want to start from Mr. David. Can you please introduce yourself with our audience and our speakers? Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Thanks a lot for the invitation, Sharif. It's an honor to speak here in this audience as well. So, from my background perspective, I have a master in supply chain management and energy and environmental management at the University of Vienna. I'm pursuing my Ph.D. in the field of circular economy, also in the field of logistics. Moreover, it's quite funny. I've also been working in Penang with Continental Automotive, and so hello, Cheong. In Butterverse was the plant, and moreover, previously I was also in Shanghai, China, working for a consulting company. But this is many years ago, 7 years actually. Currently, I'm a consultant also in the automotive sector, pursuing projects with different OEMs in the field of logistics, production, and IT.
Hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. H.F. Chong, how do you want to introduce your projects and your professional background with our audience and our speakers?
Hello everyone, good day. I'm Cheong from Penang, Malaysia. Hello, Mr. David. May I know which company are you working in Penang last time?
Pardon?
Which company automotive are you work?
Continental.
A
Continental.
Continental. I see.
Yes, in
Okay.
Butterworth.
Yeah. I think near my area. Okay. So actually, I also after I graduated, I also work in Penang at the Sony factory there about 23 years. So after that, I came out 10 years ago, and then I set up my own company. That is related to the internet business solution. Okay. And I think everybody know early of last year we had this pandemic, okay? So and many industry and then also the school also closed. And then this give me the idea how to set up the platform to connect the teacher and then the student. So and then middle of last year, so I set up this e-learning marketplace or platform. So we launch this platform end of last year. So basically, right now the response from the tutor side is quite good. I believe that due to the school or the tuition center closed at the most of the time last year in Malaysia. So it's pretty good. Right now, the this tutor site respond to create their online course and then put on my platform for sales. So this is a bit my background. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. H.F. Chong. We have our analyst, Mr. Rob and Professor Donalds. We will learn a lot about this topic. And most important thing is that how are you today? Because we know that you get your vaccine. What is your experience, Professor Mr. Rob and Professor Donalds? How do you want to share your experience with our audience?
You want me to go first? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. In industry, I carry 3 degrees: a 2-year degree in merchandising, a 4-year degree in business, and an MBA. I'm a conventionally trained analyst. I cover business broadly. I've been through the IBM Executive Resources Program, which means I've been trained by the best of the best. I've been an analyst inside IBM up through about 1992, and then was an outside analyst working for Giga, eventually the senior research fellow, the top research position in the company by 2000. And then when Forrester acquired us, I was the senior research fellow for Forrester for all of 3 months before I quit and said this wasn't any fun and went out on my own. And I've been out on my own ever since 2002. I consult with most of the major technology firms in the United States and the world, and that's me. Oh, and
Yes.
the COVID antivirus. I had the Johnson & Johnson antivirus, and it kicked my butt. I was sick for a day, but now I feel pretty good. But it was a miserable one day after the antivirus.
Excellent. Professor Donald.
Hi. Well, I've introduced myself a lot, so I'm not going to go through it too much. I have a BA in linguistics, a master's degree in information systems. I'm just trying to finish my Ph.D. in information systems at the University of Oulu, and I spent a year as a visiting scholar in sociology at Stanford, and then also worked on a book with a professor at Columbia and spent some time out there working with him, but mostly we just did stuff online. And anyway, I got the COVID vaccine. I got the 2-shot one. Rob got the 1-shot one. And I got the first shot on February 18th, and I got my second shot yesterday. And the only symptom I've had so far is a very, very sore arm, but a little bit of acetaminophen cures that up. And so I'm hoping it'll be completely fine by later today or tomorrow. I highly recommend it. It is such a relief knowing that people can start seeing each other again, and we can start going out and start going to places and having dinner and just having life again. What a relief. That's a wonderful thing. So
Thank you.
All I have to say about that.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Rob, how do you want to analyze today's topic, especially impact of COVID-19 on manufacturing and productions? Yes. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, I have to remember that damn mute button. All right. So my experiences with the U.S. manufacturing, I haven't looked much overseas manufacturing during the COVID, but we have looked quite a bit at what's been going on in manufacturing here in the United States. It has caused a large change in priorities, much higher focus now on automation than we had prior to the pandemic. And also really looking at how the workstations are laid out. A lot more of them are segmented now. Some industries that should have changed a lot, like food manufacturing, haven't changed as much as I think a lot of us were going to hope they change. And we learned an awful lot about how our food is prepared that I just as soon not know right now. One way is to take a look at that stuff, and you suddenly being a vegetarian starts looking much more attractive. But it did require companies to look at specific methods and methodologies to keep the workers safe and to avoid the now wave of lawsuits that's starting to work through the system. There were some efforts to indemnify the manufacturing sites. Much of what I've said indicates they weren't all that effective, and the lawsuits are starting to come forward for people that got sick and are claiming that they got sick due to OSHA violations. So So there was, I would argue, probably a pretty big breakdown during the Trump administration in terms of enforcing OSHA guidelines and enforcing safety. And now we've got a new administration in place that has a different belief structure, and we're seeing what is typically the rubber band effect. When one administration doesn't take something seriously, it results in problems, and another administration comes in and it becomes a priority. So it's creating a bit of a mess. But in the end, it's driving much higher automation. It's driving companies to what we call digital transformation at a much higher rate. The technology market's just going crazy at the moment. We've got spot shortages all over the place with regard to microprocessors. Much of that manufacturing is done overseas, but when you're automating factories, it's that stuff you're using to automate them. So it is creating problems now with what is a very rapid ramp to automation and robotics. We even have tests now with robots doing things like stocking store shelves and that kind of thing, which we were expecting this decade, probably in the second half. That's moved forward, and the Amazon Go concept is now, which wasn't really sustainable because of the camera and computing cost, now is going through a transformation as well. And if things continue, there's very little that we're going to see or touch, at least that's built in the United States, that won't have been affected by this pandemic, at least short term. And a lot of the stuff, once it's in, is probably not coming out. So that's been the major impact, though. A lot of automation, a lot more focus on safety with regard to viruses, and then shortages, unanticipated shortages as these companies try to convert to technology and are finding that we're tied up on manufacturing that technology overseas.
Thank you, Professor Donald.
Well, I'm going to echo a lot of what Rob said. I was reading some journals, or not necessarily journals, trade magazines from manufacturers last night. And one of the things I found very interesting was that they are talking about this as an opportunity to start moving towards more net zero manufacturing, and partially because of the automation. As I mentioned yesterday, the semiconductor supply chain problem is so large that Biden got together with industry leaders to try and figure out what to do about it. What I read is the reason for that was that there was an anticipated slowdown in the use of semiconductors because of COVID. So they just didn't manufacture enough. And they can ramp it up, I think, and get it going again. But it's just one of those things. I mean, that's one of the things that you think about with supply chains, with manufacturing, is that if you manufacture a bunch of stuff and nobody wants it, needs it right now, it just sits around. So the part that I was talking about yesterday, how money is saved and made by very, very good big data analytics, so that you can anticipate exactly what's going to wind up happening. You're never going to get it right 100% of the time, because who would plan for COVID? But actually, probably a good idea to do. I'm sure we're going to have more pandemics before too long. However, the conversion to automation, as Rob said, got very sped up because you couldn't get workers to come. It's expensive to convert something from having workers do it to automation. And that's one of the things that's important to understand about this, is when we talk about manufacturing, we think of things like maybe manufacturing computers or manufacturing cars. But if you step back a little bit, you realize that somebody's got to make the steel to make these things. And steel plants have to have a huge amount of heat to be able to melt the steel, which translates into a huge amount of energy. And the conversion to renewable energies for them is a little bit more difficult, just because of the degree of energy that they wind up having to use. And so when you look at anything about manufacturing, you have to realize that there's this series of steps, and it's really great to have somebody that's an expert at logistics here, because that's exactly what the supply chain, because that's exactly what this is about. And I co- but manufacturing, what I'm going to end with is that manufacturing journals and manufacturers are talking right now in their trade press about the opportunity that's presenting itself, because they have to spend the money because they can't get the workers crammed together in these places, because they'll all get COVID and die, and that doesn't help. So they have to switch to they have to switch to um, automation, and at the same time, it's an opportunity to switch to net zero and stop using petroleum, because they can also see that in the long term that isn't going to work out either, because it's a finite resource. And so I think we're seeing huge changes in manufacturing right now. It's kind of exciting, really.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. David, how do you want to analyze this point?
Well, speaking more from a European perspective, let's wrap it up. It's like, I mean, COVID-19 has hit Europe very hard. I can also say from my perspective, I had my last flight last year from Sofia to Vienna from a project in March. Um, it's like I can say it's like the supplier industry is hit very hard by COVID-19, because they are not prepared for further steps. They are not prepared for automatization, and they also don't get the track to pursue further. I can also see the same in the automotive industry, that actually the program of manufacturing hasn't changed that much. So it's like they have implemented security systems. So it's like that you have the safety distance, that you don't have these cross-functional teams. But the way of manufacturing and production hasn't changed in a plant that much. What has changed is that the staff, the office staff, is staying at home. And also, what has changed is that you have way more meetings, because you don't have the travel distance, you don't have the shifting of rooms, of meeting rooms. This is what has changed. Um, but I don't see so much change happening really with automation or in the production area. What is a big bottleneck where we are not prepared is really the supply chain. It's like the components are missing, because most often they are being produced in Asia. We had a lack of 3 months, no production, and this bottleneck to come after is really hard. So as an example, at the moment it's impossible to get a frame for a bicycle. It just hasn't been produced yet. And in that case, the shift of governments in Europe is more towards production in your own country again. So it's like not looking on a global scale, but more on a national scale. So bring your production home again. This is like what is really happening in Europe now, and also the governments are at the moment, in the short-term basis, they are pursuing to get the most important industries, such as health, back in the country again. So shifting back from Asia towards Europe. But in case of automation in the short term, I don't see this so much happening. Maybe in the medium term, the strategy is really okay to pursue further, but at the moment, in such a case, it's not happening, because the thing is like, um, you can't predict your sale forces, your sale numbers in such a way. And how do I plan a plant on which numbers? Yeah, this is also the case which you have to consider. And then you also have to consider that the workforce in not only Asia, but also in Eastern European countries is still way cheaper than a robotic plant. And also, what has happened, I know a case study where they have scheduled the efficiency of a complete automatized plant and a plant only relying on labor force. And the truth lies in the middle. So it's like you can't only have a plant fully automatized, but uh, you need also a lot of labor force in this case. Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. HF, how do you want to share your experience? Can you unmute yourself? Can you unmute yourself?
Okay. I just want to share, or what I observed is the for this manufacturing side. Uh, before that, the pandemic is they have a physical type of meeting. But right now, most of the I think meeting they are changed to a Zoom meeting. And then the also some stuff of course the government encourage a remove job. So what I can observe.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. HF. Mr. Rob, I want to ask you because you are you have a strong engagement with US based big corporations, especially those who are tech companies and other things. Mr. David actually come up with a different idea and perspective from Asia as well as in from Europe. So how do you want to analyze like this kind of technological transformations, how many years it takes, what you see the prospects and how it will be helpful for the manufacturing industry, let's say for Malaysia?
Well, as David pointed out, the economic blend is really what has the at least the near term advantages. Of full automation is still it's very expensive and it's pretty hard to justify. The reason it was being pushed in was because it was the driver was to keep the factories open and operating, not necessarily operating as cost effectively. It was kind of binary. If you don't have workers coming into the factory, you can't build anything. And so there was a huge push to automate things that we didn't think were going to get automated for a long while. I mean, give you for instance, about 4 years ago, a different group than mine did a review and indicated that if you're going to automate jobs, you'd automate jobs like mine that are very expensive and not automate blue collar jobs, which are relatively cheap because the cost of the equipment. You could do analytical work, which is where computers are strong, relatively cheaply. But doing production work, that equipment was quite a bit more expensive, and the workers you were replacing were quite a bit cheaper. But this pandemic flipped everything on its head because people like me, we're not close proximity and we can work remote. So we could continue to work during the pandemic. Factory workers couldn't. The worker guidelines in the United States, and I know in parts of Europe, are fairly strict. And if workers are being put at risk, that risk can dominate the decision and shut down the plants. And as David pointed out, a lot of the supply chain went south during the pandemic. Some intentionally because they thought sales was going to drop and it didn't, and some just because of the pandemic. So it's a mess. And there's another part of the mess though is during this period of time, China increased their dominance and ownership of some critical supplies. And the difficulty now is they kind of control things like rare earth metals, and those are critical to manufacturing electronics. So we've got a series of problems we're going to have to work through. I will say this though, the pandemic advanced significantly the work to automate these parts of businesses that weren't getting a lot of focus because they were just too expensive to automate, and the cost savings wasn't high enough. I expect we're going to see that if we get this pandemic, deployment effort may slow, but you're not going to turn back the development. So I think it's going to move up rather dramatically, full automation, and move it into this decade, where I think before a lot of us were thinking we weren't going to get the full automation until late 2030s and maybe 2040s, when the economies of scale kicked in. It now looks like we're going to get to full automation in a number of industries, possibly by the late part of this decade, but maybe by the early 2030s. As a result, because once you put in place momentum, it's really hard to stop that momentum. People are thinking, well, what about the next pandemic? How are we going to be ready? And manufacturing lines in particular are very difficult to isolate from a pandemic. You can do it. You can have working teams. You can test the teams. You can vaccinate the teams and keep them contained. And fortunately, a lot of things, even cars, high-end cars, are built by teams now, not by traditional manufacturing lines, but a lot of stuff is. One other interesting thing that happened, though, during the pandemic were the right to repair laws that just came into Europe. That's gonna have a major impact across the ecosystem as well, because it's forcing people to rethink how they're building things. Instead of riveting hardware together, the stuff has to now be dismantleable. You have to be able to take it apart, and that's causing folks to really rethink how they're building a lot of the products and trying to make them sustainable. The European rules that I believe the UK is adopting now that they're separate are that the product has to remain in service for 10 years. Now, mostly that's hitting appliances and not general electronics, but we're all expecting those rules to broaden to electronics shortly. And if the US wants to participate, they're going to have to conform to those rules as well. So it appears it's going to be a worldwide event. And this might actually have a bigger impact on manufacturing than the pandemic did, because it's forcing people to rethink how you build things, and forcing another trend, which we call as a service, where increasingly, rather than buying something, you will kind of rent it and you will get a service tied to it that will sustain that device, much more along the lines of, say, a cable model, where you pay, at least here in the United States and in parts of Europe, you pay for the cable service. They supply the hardware for free at a very low cost, often below their cost, and they make it up on the service revenue. And then their motivation switches from wanting you to replace that equipment to generate revenue to wanting you to remain stable, so you don't switch to another service provider. It's a huge dynamic change, and it could do a tremendous amount for sustainability, because we clearly throw out a lot of stuff that we could, if it was designed properly, repair. If we look at automotive alone, even Ford's looking at the idea of becoming a company like Uber, as opposed to a company like Ford that provides cars as a service. And as we expect, as those things move to autonomous driving, we're expecting that market to flip rather solidly towards automation. The Uber, it's not really manufacturing, but it just shows another area of autonomy that's coming in. And that automotive autonomy is now bleeding over into drones. It's bleeding over into manufacturing floor autonomy. That same technology now has viability across the ecosystem, and it's starting to drive planning changes. And in the second half of the decade, it will drive more changes on the line. And we are finding some really interesting stuff, like those autonomous systems do a lot better for jobs that are highly repetitive. Now, those tend to be low-paying jobs, but there are jobs where a lot of mistakes are made and a lot of quality problems are introduced into the line, because people just get bored and that are just tired. And don't get me wrong, my idea of hell is doing a repetitive job on a manufacturing line, and it certainly could change, at least eliminate some of the jobs that are both physically damaging because they're highly repetitive, and mentally damaging because they're incredibly boring. So we're looking at a change, some of that tangentially related to the pandemic, like the development of heavy automation and AIs, and some directly connected to the pandemic, which is how do you better isolate workers during a high flu period or a time when you've got disease flowing through the environment. And we're not done with it. This decade is being highlighted as a decade of massive change, with much of that change slated for the second half of the decade as these technologies come online and manufacturing sites implement.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, sir. Even in Asia Pacific, we are observing, even World Talent Economy Forum, this corporation already joins, like supply chains from Japan. They already introduce heavily robots, AI, and many more things. And they already pushed this.
Japan's been aggressive with robotics for years. Some of the most automated plants I've ever seen are in Japan. If you ever want to have some fun, one of the Lenovo plants, the entire manufacturing floor was the warehousing floor was automated. It was like watching a huge automated train set. I just kind of sat and watched it for 4 hours. It was just fascinating. They wouldn't let me ride on it though.
Yes, Japan's supply chain company Shawa, we are working together with World Talent Economy Forum, and they have heavily involvement with this robotics, AIs, and this kind of things. Even their cleanings to all of the activities actually done by this robotics and these things. Beside that, even Malaysian company, I think Mr. H.F. Chong also know about that they have drone companies, and this drone company, one of the top 3-4 level drone company. Even in the COVID-19 situation, they're heavily utilizing, Malaysia and other countries utilize this drone for their manufacturing, for their medicine supplies, and many more things they're utilizing it. Anyway, Professor Donald, so how do you want to analyze after the discussions of Mr. David and Mr. Rob? Yeah. Unmute yourself, please.
I really liked what Rob said about the different levels of ways that are different levels of people that can be automated, because one thing that's where automation has actually caused job losses is surprisingly enough in hedge funds, because the way that the hedge funds work, it's just absolutely has to be done by computers, because what they're doing is they're using the delay sometimes in the speed of how fast a message gets over the internet to be able to buy and sell stock in a way where they can actually sell some stock and cause the price to go down and sell it short at the same time. And they can, using a delay of milliseconds, they can make money by doing that. And so the most expensive property in Manhattan is the closer you get to the cable, the transatlantic cable, because the difference in time, if you're on the other side of Manhattan, is enough to actually handicap you, so you can't do that as well. So they had massive job losses at hedge funds just a year or two ago, where they just basically fired everybody because they don't need them anymore. I will say that here in Silicon Valley, that the Tesla plant, which was a big giant building that was used by different people over the years, it started out as, I think, Chevrolet built it, and then Toyota took it over and built parts, and now Tesla has it, and I don't think they're going to move it to Texas. They just moved their corporate offices. Like the whole idea that people are moving to Texas is kind of, they're moving their incorporation to Texas for tax reasons. Larry Ellison isn't going to move to Texas and give up his house in Woodside and his yachts.
Houses. He has a fleet of yachts and a crap ton of houses.
Yeah, he does pretty well. Yeah. And I've talked to Oracle people, and they said, well, nobody here is going to Texas. They own Redwood Shores, is basically Oracle, and so they're not going anywhere. But anyway, that's a kind of a side note. Tesla also was not closing their plant in Fremont, and I had a friend whose job was a robot repairman. And we'd be having dinner, and all of a sudden he'd get a page, and his cell phone would ring, and he said, oh no, one of our robots is down. I have to rush and fix the robot. And that plant originally had thousands of people working for it when Toyota was building stuff, and now it has hundreds. I mean, the difference is incredible. And basically the people that work there have degrees in mechanical engineering and can fix the robots. So
yeah, but they knew nothing about cars, which was the problem. Their fit and finish is horrible for a plant that is one of the most highly automated automotive plants on the planet, and they can't get gaps even. It's the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. It's what happens when you hire a bunch of guys that, yeah, they understand robotics, they might understand manufacturing, but they don't understand cars at all. Just a couple car guys would have made a huge friggin' difference in trying to build that plant out. Anyway,
Teslas are fantastic cars, though.
They're great cars.
Insane.
Their fit finish is horrible.
The Consumers Report had to redo their rating scale because Tesla came out over 100%.
Well, they broke the one that tested roof strength. They actually broke the machine on the Tesla. The Tesla didn't break, the machine broke. It's built like a tank, but you can't repair it. We're back to that right to repair thing. If you get an accident in a Tesla, it's probably going to be totaled because the whole thing's welded together.
I see. Yeah, I had a friend who had a Tesla, and he called it the Red Angel. He loved it so much, and somebody backed into it in a parking lot. He used to, when I'd go with him, he'd park at the most remote part of the parking lot, so there was no cars anywhere near him. But that didn't work. Somebody did manage to hit him. I think they rear-ended him is what happened. Yeah. If I remember correctly. But anyway, automation is, as Rob points out, it's fraught with peril because you think about the idea that somebody's just screwing a bolt. Their whole job all day long is screwing one bolt on a wheel that's going down an assembly line. There's Modern Times by Charlie Chaplin. If you haven't seen that, I'd highly recommend it. It's hysterical, and he's got a job just basically tightening two bolts all day long. That's what he does, and he eventually goes nuts. and so it's worth seeing. But yeah, so as I often say, in the end, it's all basically software. And we're getting better and better at software that can adjust what it does. Because in the case I was just saying, if the robot is tightening bolts and the car comes down the assembly line a little bit off of where it's normally supposed to do, how's it going to know to tighten the bolts? Everything has to be exact like that. But now we're getting to the point where we can use cybernetics and feedback so that we can adjust what we're doing so that it can adjust where the bolts are. But it's a slow process. It's going to take a while. It's very complicated. So
thank you, Professor. Thank you. Mr. David, how do you want to analyze this point? Because yes, we know that still there is a huge room that we need progressions. So I'm sure that you are sharing your experience from different practical experience, but how we can improve and in this manufacturing industry.
It's a delicate question. The thing is, what we shall ask ourselves is always, how many products do we need? Yeah, and at what point are we satisfied? We are gathering more and more products which are obsolete at a very small rate. So after a very short time, they are obsolete. And this is a question which we should ask ourselves, is it really necessary? Your question is how to make manufacturing better, how to make it more efficient. Of course, the answer is by robots, because a robot can narrow down a problem to a micrometer or to an even smaller scale. But also always my question is, what is happening with all the people? What is happening with all blue collar job people? We are going to 10 billion people up. We are not decreasing in numbers, but we are raising in numbers. And so we also need more jobs. Of course, we get more jobs in the IT sector. But still, it's like at the moment we have a shift since not only COVID-19, we have a shift since 20 years in IT, in automation, etc. Yeah, and this is what we need to ask ourselves, really. How to make a plant more efficient? Of course, you make different lines. You have different tools, etc. for this. But I don't know if this is really the case or the course which is COVID-19 taking us. As an example, Amazon is relying heavily on blue collar workers. And Amazon is one of the top IT companies I know in the US. And I'm hearing here a lot of example from a theoretical side. I know they are very high IT plants, very high automated plants. But the reality is a different side. The reality is like Industry 4.0. We are at the starting in Europe. In Asia, you have a lot of particle problems in the plant. This is the reality. I mean, okay, Japan, Korea is a different example, are different countries. They are high IT countries. But really is like, in my opinion, this is really my opinion, also COVID-19 will not change that tremendously our way of manufacturing and production. It will accelerate certain stuff, but also is what we need to ask ourselves, what is the life worth of a worker? You can scale this down to a monetary amount. And then you can also see the security concepts in developing countries.
Yes, this is very interesting. That how we can improve these developing countries and their system, the ecosystem. I think many things we have to finish. So, Mr. Chong, how do you want to share your experience from Malaysia, especially from Penang? What's going on inside the Penang, especially manufacturing industry?
Okay. So, from Malaysia, other than manufacturing, uh, many retails, how to say, business already transformed from the offline to online. But for
Hmm.
the manufacturing side, because I'm not in this field long time already, so I believe for Malaysia, government did gives the incentive, how to say, uh, subsidy or to support this small medium industry. So, like example, give the 50% support on the salary or the worker salary, those are below certain range. So this type of government support in order to make sure they can survive for this
Okay.
pandemic. Yeah.
Okay, okay, thank you. Mr. Rob, I have a question from what I get from Mr. David, like what will happen to these blue collar jobs next 10 years? You give us the guideline for 2030, right? Like, yeah.
Oh, a lot of them are going to go away. I mean, there's really no. We're in the United States. We're talking about a shift of about 100 million jobs by the end of the decade, and I think that shift has moved up thanks to the pandemic. Because it's changed the underlying priorities, and that does mean that companies that are aware of this are ramping up their programs to retrain. All these people are going to have to be retrained. In fact, some of the advice going on out right now to people looking for jobs is seek out companies that have, as part of the benefits package you're going to receive, an aggressive retraining program that you can participate on. You do not want to be on the wrong side of this particular trend. With every industrial revolution, there is a certain class of people that become obsolete if they don't become retrained, and this is going to be a pretty huge class of people that are going to become obsolete. I mean, everything from truck drivers all the way down to manufacturing line workers that are certainly doing repetitive jobs. Those are going to go away, and a lot of us on the analytics side are going to have to change and come up to speed as well, because we're going to have to shift to, instead of doing the analysis ourselves, to using increasingly autonomous systems to do the analysis for us, and then raising up our level of engagement so that we're able to deal with the result and assure, probably do more work in terms of assuring the source data. I mean, that what it's doing is it's kind of shifting where the gore points are with regard to skills. Right now, a lot of the gore points are in computer science, but it's going to change a bit, and also be aware that with every change like this, some of those jobs won't go away. They'll actually become more valuable. For instance, repair jobs on old equipment. As people retrain and learn to work on new stuff, the people that can work on the old stuff are going to become at some point more valuable. We ran into that with mainframes, where for a period of time you couldn't get a job if you had mainframe experience because there were way too many people that were trained and way too few jobs. Now, because a lot of those people have pivoted, now there are a decent number of jobs and too few people that are trained to do them. So it can change. So there are two strategies. One is to maybe be one of the last people standing in a critical job and make that your life career and in it if you enjoy it. But the other is maybe pivot early and be one of the first people to work in the new areas and help train others to come up to speed. But in any case, the advice is if you're seeking employment, prefer the employers that have aggressive retraining programs and then participate in them. So when the market pivots, you can pivot with the market, and you're not left in unemployed with a skill set that the too few jobs and too many people.
Thank you, Professor Donald.
Oops, am I muted? Nope, I'm not. Okay, cool. Well, people made a lot of interesting points. One thing I'd like to do right off is tell a story I love. I mean, I hope everybody else does, which is I was sitting in a pub in Palo Alto and with my wife, and this older gentleman came over and said, well, do you mind if I sit with you? And we said, no, not at all. How wonderful. And he sat down and he started talking about his career. And he said he had a degree in, I forget what, but probably some sort of electrical area. And he came and he applied for a job. And there was this very nice Austrian man named Ernest Kleiner who met with him and interviewed him, and he liked him, and he said, okay, you're hired, go down the hall, your boss's name's Gordon Moore. And if you don't know, this was while it was still Fairchild. These are the people who started Intel. And what he was doing was working on the very, very first integrated circuits. And they started making these integrated circuits. They figured out how to do it. They were doing it, and they ran into a problem. They could make electronic stuff so cheap that they couldn't figure out how to make money on it. And he said, so we had a meeting, and he said, and that was the meeting that changed the world. We came up with the idea of disposable electronics. That was the meeting that changed the world. And I thought that's incredible. I mean, just so what David was talking about is kind of, it created a problem in the long term because we don't have enough rare earth metals. We don't have enough all the things that we need to make disposable electronics anymore. And as he was saying, as Rob was saying, there's a trend towards being able to repair things and having things that last and so on like that. I think that an interesting thing about this retraining thing, because I've worked at or I've given classes to adults being retrained in Finland. And the government is very, very good there about people who lose their jobs. The government itself provides retraining for them. It's part of it. And if you read The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, which is one of the seminal books of capitalism, he actually has about 40 pages in it where he argues that businesses have no incentive to retrain people. Because if they do, what's going to wind up happening is that have more skills, and with those more skills, they could potentially go to their competitor, and that's something that happens it's part of the culture of Silicon Valley. People within an organization can only go up one level, or it'll bum everybody else out. So what they do instead is they'll go to a different corporation and notch up 3 levels. But the way Silicon Valley operates is that that's okay, because the corporation who lost the person will get somebody from another corporation. And you think of Silicon Valley maybe as one large company with lots of different departments where people can bounce around, and it just worked out that way. A difficulty is that companies don't, even if somebody stays at the same company, when you invest in somebody's to train somebody, it's an investment. You have to actually spend time and money training that person. And what happens is that as people get older, they ask the question, well, if I spend this much training this person, how many years of service am I going to get out of this product, basically? And after a certain age, companies don't want to train people anymore, because the investment won't pay off for them. And so that's actually one of the points that Adam Smith made. And ultimately, that has to be something that is part of government. That has to be taken out. And Adam Smith, who was, as I said, kind of one of the fathers of capitalism, or at least it went back farther than that, but he is one of the most cited people in capitalism, believed that education needed to be done by the state. Now, one thing I want to mention, there's 2 other things. One of them is the talk about Amazon. Well, I use Amazon frequently. I mean, a lot. And I live in a rural town that doesn't have much, many stores, and, they're far apart and blah, blah, blah. So Amazon, just brings the stuff to my door. I mean, it's the easiest thing in the world. Well, when COVID hit, Amazon went from overnight or 2-day delivery to a week. It went to a week. And the reason is because they couldn't staff their centers, because their demand went through the roof, and also they were having trouble getting people into the warehouses where they load the boxes onto trucks and sort them and things like that. And so they had to hire over 100,000 people just for their warehouses to do that particular job. And they did, and they're back to 1-day service or 2-day service. But it really supports what David was saying about it's going to be a while before. I mean, they're as David said, they're one of the most sophisticated IT companies in the world, and they're doing everything they can to automate. But it's going to be a while. And I want to end what I'm just saying right now with also talking about something David said, which fits into everything I've been saying right now, which is that you have to ask the question, how is it that you measure what you're doing in a corporation? How do you measure it? If you don't measure it, then you don't know what you're doing. Human brain is such that we see things that aren't there very easily. So over the 20th century, the idea got to be that we'd measure everything basically by profits. So a great CEO is one that happens to be leader of the company when the company's making high profits. If there's a recession or something and the profits go down, then they decide it's the CEO's fault and they fire them and they try and hire some other rock star CEO. But the ultimate thing about it is that in the United States, it's very, very common for, say, for instance, if you invest in a company, the only way you can get your money back is there's some liquidity event. And a liquidity event means that basically you sell the company. And you either sell it to the public markets, which is doing an IPO, or you sell it to another company. So at the time that the company is being sold, the profits become one of the metrics that tell how valuable the company is. So you can game the system by firing a bunch of people, which lowers your costs. And therefore, since your costs are lower, your profits are higher, and therefore the company looks more valuable, even though in reality, they're losing some of their intellectual capital and tacit knowledge, and it actually weakens the company. So a difficulty is, and it's being addressed in some places in the world, is we can't measure success simply by dollars and cents. We have to start looking at well-being of various sorts. So well-being can be things like health, satisfaction, family structure. Is your family healthy? Is what's the crime like where you are? How many people are living under bridges? I mean, well-being is about your society and your social structure. And some of the countries that are the most successful, they're the happiest, they've got stable, they're very stable, are the Nordic countries. And in all of those countries, university education is free. They have unemployment system where if your job goes away, you're not going to starve to death. The government takes care of retraining. Education is there. Healthcare is taken care of. All of those things happen. And I've lived there, and I know that people say, yeah, we pay high taxes, but we get something for it. I mean, it's worth it. It's an investment. It's an investment in our society. So when you're looking at developing countries, I think that if you want to, one single most important thing is to realize that everybody needs to do is invest in the society that they're in. You need to invest in it. And then some of these problems, the answers to some of these problems become obvious. So there, I'll pass it on.
Thank you. Thank you. We have our honorable guest, Dr. Talib. I think already our speakers and everybody know about him. He was UN WTO Secretary Generals, as well as he has a lot of contributions. I'm sure that he is also board member for Airbnb and many important organizations he's serving right now. Very successful politicians, academicians, and policymakers. So, sir, how do you want to analyze today's problem, especially manufacturing industry in COVID-19 period?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question again, please?
Sir, how do you want to analyze the problem of manufacturing industry in COVID-19 period? How do you want to analyze the problem?
Okay. Thank you so much for welcoming me here again. It's good to be amongst these fine people once again, and especially you, Sharif. Thank you so much. I think the manufacturing industry is a very vital industry. It's an industry that has built our 21st century, 20th and 21st century culture all together. We're still living in a manufacturing era. But COVID-19 has changed everything now. I think COVID-19 is expected to move us into the second generation of change, which is the technological generation. And I believe that, as my predecessor said, societies will not be in danger anymore. I think we've learned our lessons very well. I'm a believer in the future of this mankind. I'm a believer in this progression, per se. We're entering into a technological era, that's true. But this is not going to be on the expense of manufacturing. People think they're going to lose jobs because of manufacturing. That's not going to happen, because other jobs will be created in the process. I'm sure about this. Now societies will survive this, that I'm sure of. I'm a very optimistic person. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Talib. Mr. David, like you bring very important point, especially for the blue-collar jobs as well as grassroots level. I'm sure Dr. Talib has very good article and policy for grassroots levels. How do you want to make a good strategy for this grassroots level employees as well as these blue collar job employees, how we can take care of this kind of people? What your advice?
Before I answer the question, I would like to add to Donald about education. Is like why Germany is or has been so successful is because of the Napoleon War and the start of educational system by the by different reforms. So it's like Adam Smith is a great was a great person, but I think at that point he was completely wrong. And Robert, I also hope that COVID-19 is accelerating repairs and remanufacturing, especially because this is a really really important thing. Well, with grassroots level movements, can only be put up by the government. So the government needs to subsidize and to
Mhm.
completely support these grassroots level movements by easy laws, by easy startup movements. It's like in Europe, the startup scene is completely different than in the States. We have way harder or stricter laws and different barriers than in the States, which makes it way more difficult to start grassroots level movements. Nevertheless, like I said, is like one point is the government and also organizations to foster knowledge, to gather knowledge, and to put people together. Yeah. Does it answer the question, or shall I?
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Rob. Uh, Many point actually come, especially number one, definitely manufacturing industry move with their different innovation like robots, like different kind of AI integrations and many more things. On the other hand, uh, highly populated country, developing nations, they have a challenge. They have a practical problem with the grassroots level things. Even I can share one of my personal experience when I go to develop a waste management system. A city, like I go to a city, I go there for develop a waste management infrastructure, and that time I cannot because of lot of grassroots level people actually have engagement with this waste management system. So if we go for the automated automation and this kind of things, politicians or the policymaker, they has to face a lot of challenges. So this is some sort of practical experience we are sharing, how we can solve these kind of things. Is there any better strategy, better policy we can implement these developing nations, or how we can work together?
Well, the objective of the governments for developing nations are not only to assure that people are working today, but they'll be able to work tomorrow. And that's why retraining is so important. One of the problems that the developing nations currently have, thanks to the pandemic, is a lot of the developed nations who previously were offshoring a lot of the manufacturing are now thinking about re-onboarding that manufacturing. In other words, bringing that manufacturing back in state. Because the pandemic did identify in logistics a huge problem and exposure. If a country is not protected against the pandemic and they're on the critical path to a product, that product stops being built because you can't get the parts. And so now there's an effort in the US in particular to bring a lot of those manufacturing jobs that have been shifted out to other countries back into the States so the countries and the country can better assure its own manufacturing and product capability. That's problematic. And that means that the developing nations also they either have to provide a counter argument where they can continue to build this stuff and do so securely so that those that depend upon them can continue to depend upon them, or they themselves have to go down a path of self-sustenance. In other words, they have to complete the project on their own and in country build the entire thing. Now, we've certainly seen in places like South America efforts to require countries to build products that are sold in country. But it's hard to scale that because an awful lot of products, you don't have enough demand in country to justify the manufacturing needed to build it. And you can do it, but the products then become much more expensive for your citizens than they do for everybody else. And that's kind of like a hidden tax, and nobody appreciates that. So if my advice is think strategically. If you can harden the companies that you have that are building for other countries, and then represent that your supplies will be sustainable through another pandemic or problem, then you may put your replacement at a lower priority than some other country or manufacturing site that hasn't done that work. But in the end, you're going to be responsible for not only assuring your workers can be employed today, but employed tomorrow. It does you no good to protect those jobs if you become too costly or too risky for the related manufacturing to happen in your country. You still lose those jobs if there's nothing to sell, if people won't buy what those companies are building. So you have to assure the security of the manufacturing plants first, and then be prepared to pivot if those things are going away, either because of advancement or because of pandemic concerns. And certainly you don't want to lose those jobs because your people simply are no longer viable because the industry has moved on.
Thank you, Professor Donald.
You're still muted.
Couldn't find my cursor there. I have a giant screen. Anyway, to Rob's point, the example that people often give is subsidizing buggy whip manufacturers when cars were invented. It's not. It's what we can often do, and I definitely agree with Rob that we had basically a problem when we manufactured. United States invented memory chips, and we were manufacturing memory chips. Then Japan and then Korea got into manufacturing memory chips, and the governments were subsidizing creating these memory chips. So the United States then switched and started making electronic products that used memory chips, and we could buy the memory chips from Korea cheaper than we could make them here, and therefore we could make products that we could sell in Korea and Japan cheaper than they could make them. And so that's always going to be an issue, is that if we start closing our borders and start not using the comparative advantage of the different countries, we're going to wind up with products that are no longer competitive. The solution to that, I mean, one of the solutions is to have multiple sources for your supplies, but sometimes that isn't practical. I really like what Dr. Toleb said about new jobs taking the place. There's a word in English, Luddite, which means people who are afraid of technological change, and that goes back to a group that were against the automation of spinning mills and texture manufacturing. And they would break into the plants and trash the machines because they felt that the jobs were going to go away because of the automation. But that's not what happened. I mean, there are more jobs now than there ever were. There's jobs coming, and so people tend to look, as long as human beings need something, there's going to be an opportunity for people to provide that. And I don't think there's ever going to be a time when human beings aren't going to have things that they want and need. So I'd like to go and what David said about the difference in Europe and the United States, and I've mentioned this before in earlier shows, that I've actually given talks about Silicon Valley to the Austrian government, so I talked to them about it. And in many countries in the world, failing is not acceptable. If you go bankrupt, that's the end of you. It's just not acceptable. But in the United States, we have bankruptcy laws that allow people to just erase their debts and start again. That is a tremendous advantage because people can then start companies and do their best, but if the company doesn't make it, then they're not ruined for life. And that's kind of what makes Silicon Valley, one of the things that makes it successful is the churn of people starting things that fail, because for every company you've heard of, there's 1,000 companies in Silicon Valley that didn't make it. However, the United States has a problem with its system, which is that if somebody loses all their money in bankruptcy, then they're kind of in trouble because they don't have health care, they don't have a source of income, and you're in deep trouble. Whereas in Finland, even though the bankruptcy laws aren't as good, they you still have health care, you still have a way that you can live. So Finland is very, very good at doing startups too. So these are two different approaches, and it seems to me that combining the approaches would be the way to go. It's a cultural thing though, and it goes back to education, being able to have people culturally understand that failure is not the worst thing in the world. The one other thing, my research is about social networks, human social networks, or relational networks, I think I can call them to not get confusing. But innovation takes place a lot from people borrowing ideas from one place and putting them into another. And somebody mentioned that the combination of relationships is important. And I think that people need to learn that every person, every group of people, every cluster of people that you meet that's different than you has something that they can teach you. And I think it's important from a personal and a country level. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you. We already have our another guest, Mr. Home Stoner. He's a chairman of Pacific Rim Business Council. So, sir, how are you, and how do you want to share your experience in manufacturing industry?
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm just waking up here. I'm in Los Angeles here, so it's early in the morning. Well, basically,
it's 6 o'clock in the evening here in Jordan.
Yes. We have our Dr. Talib. He was Secretary General for UN World Tourism Organizations, 2017. Still, he's working for World Economic Forums. He also responsible for international labor organizations and many of the top corporations. He working as a chairman and advisors. And also he is supporting World Talent Economy Forum as our chief advisors. Mr. Home Stonley, also Pacific Rim Business Council chairman, and he also supporting World Talent Economy Forum initiative. He is also advisor for us. Yes, Mr. Home Stoner.
Now, what are we talking about? You're talking about manufacturing?
Yes.
Okay, well, we have, just to make it very quick and brief, been around 33 years. We've got 440,000 small and micro companies under our in our database that are active, and we started this in Japan, and now we're 24 countries, and our primary purpose is for trade. We set this up for trade, and probably a good 50% of that trade has something to do with the manufacturing process. So what we basically have done is helped manufacturers connect and set up their own supply chains so that they can be more efficient, and also to bring in more FDI, foreign direct investment, into these countries, specifically Asian countries, so that they can grow faster with better and well-designed equipment. I myself have been in the manufacturing arena here for a good 25 years. and primarily in steel and fabricating steel. But what we've seen here is as the manufacturing industry becomes more intelligent, we see less and less people involved and more computers and robotics and all the latest technologies being integrated into the manufacturing lines to the point now where we have 30% less workers this year than we had 2 years ago. There are not more jobs, there are going to be less jobs. And the jobs that are going to be available are going to be more skilled jobs. So you're going to find the unskilled jobs catapulting exponentially. So we've got to do something about these untrained people in a very highly trained world.
Thank you. Dr. Talib, as you are also responsible for ILO, so what the futures, actually, what we are discussing about this grassroots levels, even the blue collars employees, even AIs and robotics already like join in the supply chain as well as the manufacturing industry. What your
I'm
observation?
surprised.
What will happen?
I'm surprised to hear that there are less jobs today than there were yesterday. My data indicates that there are more jobs today than there were ever in the history of mankind. So I agree that robots are taking place of men in some manufacturing lines, but there are other jobs that are being created through innovation, through startup. Man's imagination can never stop. So I don't see that as a problem, really. I don't think we should be afraid of technology going forward. What we should do is prepare ourselves the best possible way at the grassroots level as well. Now, I'm very, very much in line with what our predecessor, my colleague here, said about the evolution of mankind. You know, the world is not a fair world now. That's a fact. You know, so the stronger countries are dictating their own systems. So developing countries are just following that. And I don't think that the idea of imagining that you could do all your manufacturing in these developed countries without depending on the developing countries to produce some of your parts would work. That's a Donald Trump dream. He wanted to bring everything back to the States. It's not going to work. The more we work towards a more combined world, a more fair world, more interrelated world, the better off we are as human beings altogether. I want to promote that concept, the concept of opening up to each other, concept of fairness and justice, because equity now is a problem, especially in COVID-19. Look at the vaccination process, for example. Countries that are manufacturing vaccine are playing a political game now. They're protecting their own people, but they're very stringent when it comes to distributing the vaccine on other people. It's not going to work because the world is one, the world is interconnected, especially in the area that I'm working in, which is travel and tourism. You can't have a country that's vaccinated completely and think that it's safe because it's going to travel to other countries. Other people are going to come to its country. So the world is one, whether we like it or not. And that's the future of mankind. It's not something new. We should never be afraid of technology at all. What we should be aware of is justice and equity. These are the two words we should keep always in mind. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. David.
Well, I completely disagree with technology because we as human beings, we are still in a nomadic system because we have been living as nomads longer than we are living as a settled being. And we are not healthy persons anymore in this regard. Yeah. Are you satisfied with your life at the moment, sitting in front of a laptop? Me as a person running from meeting to meeting, yeah, and not having enough time to enjoy myself, to go out. Sorry, this is not the case. We are a part of nature, but we are alienating ourselves from nature, and this is the issue. So it's like, yeah, technology has made us more, or has raised our standard, but from a consciousness side, we aren't there yet. We haven't arrived at the 21st century as a human being. As you can see on a psychological perspective, how many people are not satisfied with their lives, how many suicide mortals you have, etc. Yeah, this is like the other side of technology, I would add.
May I say
Thank you.
something here, please?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, technology is being treated as if it's something new in our lives. We have always had technologies, different level of technologies. When we created fire, it was technology. When we created the wheel, it was a technology. So there's nothing new about it. Man has never been happier, actually, in their lives. I want to dispute this. Mankind has always been progressing forward. I don't think we've ever seen a better life than we are living now. Now I know that you can feel nostalgic towards wanting to go outdoors, wanting to breathe, leave the computer. But you can do that. You have a choice to do that. Man's life has always been going from better to better. I believe in that completely. I disagree with you that technology has ruined our life. What technology are we talking about? Our technological path has always been constant. And technology is not just a computer. Technology is everything we touch as human beings. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Rob, as a tech analyst, how do you want to define these things? Yeah.
Well, both David and Talib are right in their respective areas and approach. I mean, technology can be good for it. I mean, technology is a thing. It is a piece of paper good or bad? It depends what you put on it. Is a robot good or bad? It depends what it does. Is an AI good or bad? It depends on how you train it. It really kind of depends. Next week I'm doing a talk on ethics and artificial intelligence, and it's an interesting topic because even coming to a consensus as to what the core morals you would use to define what an ethical AI would be are in dispute. So that there is no hard line between right and wrong, and often your personal happiness has much more to do with you than it does with any element that's happening outside. As Talib points out, we are living better holistically, at least in the developed nations, than ever before. But if you go to someplace like Yemen, yeah, not so much. A lot of those people are starving at the moment. And you could say that there is a technological aspect to that as well, though you can also point out the government being a big part of the problem. But in the end, technology is a thing. It's how you use it, and it's part of our responsibility and government's responsibility to make sure that it's used for the betterment of mankind and to make our lives better. I'm having a discussion. I'm a moderator on an automotive forum, and we're having a discussion about electric cars, for instance, at the moment, which is one of the big trends coming in. And the people that really like gas cars think this is just one of the most horrible things that have ever happened. But gasoline has done horrible things to world economic power. It's caused major shifts. It's resulted in massive pollution. It's killing people, and so we really should be moving off of the petrochemical market. But that was a technological advancement that was badly implemented. We now have the capability of producing green gas, gasoline that doesn't pollute. The existing industry is going to fight that. But if they'd embraced it 10 years ago, they wouldn't be looking at going out of business today. So it really requires folks to think strategically. If you want technology to be good, then that has to be part of the requirement. Because in the end, I work with the Lifeboat Foundation as well, where we talk about risks that could wipe out the race. And often those risks are coming from technology. They've got the AI Shield project, which is an effort to create an artificial intelligence that could be brought up rapidly and defend against a hostile AI that's trying to kill off humanity. It's kind of the counterpoint to Terminator movies. But if you remember, the cyber policy in the U.S. started with the movie War Games, which was a fictional movie that scared Ronald Reagan half to death. So I guess the point is both David and Talib can be right. You want Talib to be right. Too often David is right, and the end is if we want to have a long, happy life with technology, then that has to be a focus and a requirement, that we have to make that the priority, and that priority has to exceed the economic benefit of developing the technology. Otherwise, things are going to go sideways, as they often do. Yeah, Talib.
Yeah.
Oh, and am I pronouncing your name properly? I have a feeling I'm butchering.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay.
You're saying it correctly. Thank you so much, Rob. Every new innovation has its downside and its advantage. When we discovered fire, we never thought that fire would end up burning people's homes. We thought it was just only for cooking. When we went to the atomic discovery, we never thought of the atomic bomb, and so on and so forth. So every discovery, every new technology has its downside, that's for sure. But what I'm saying is I believe in mankind. Mankind is capable of correcting their mistakes. Our history has been such, even the climate issues. I think what you said is absolutely correct. When you talk about gasoline, when gasoline was first discovered, it was a blessing for everybody. Now it's not. So it's time for it to develop into something else. That's what I'm saying. So technology today, just to answer David a bit, is not what we have at hand only. We can't just see the downside of it. You have to look at what's ahead of this and be optimistic about it. Be determined that you can turn this technology into something better.
So I would argue one of the problems is transparency, because back in the 1930s, there were reports that were issued that indicated that the petrochemical market was going to be a disaster. It would just the path that we were on were going to cause huge problems for the world, both in terms of power shifting between nations and pollution. And those reports were suppressed.
I know, Rob, but we had to try it. We had to
I'm just saying that one of the goals has to be transparency, so that
Absolutely.
we get the information out. So when we're making decisions for the betterment of the race, not just making decisions to enrich a certain small core group of individuals, which has been our consistent problem. Transparency is incredibly important. When Facebook came to market, I don't think any of us anticipated it was going to become the problem that it has become with what we call fake news and false information, and creating.
Yes.
Now we've got huge in the United States. We've got huge domestic terrorist organizations we didn't have before, and that's largely due to social media. So in the end, as technology can be good or bad, and the only way to assure it doesn't become bad is we need transparency. We need to analyze the good and bad, and then we need to make decisions that are focused on the betterment of mankind, and not focused on just the enrichment of the individuals that are driving the technology and product. That kind of requires everybody.
That's exactly what I'm saying, Rob.
I know.
We're more transparent than we've ever been before in our history. We're more democratic. We're more fair than we've ever been before. We're more equal as human beings than we were ever before. We haven't reached a point where we could feel proud of it, but we definitely are much more transparent than we were before. If transparency is what you're focusing on. I'm talking about the quality of life. Quality of life now is much better than it was 50 years ago.
In general.
We forget that 60 years ago, ladies were not able to vote in Switzerland even. 60 years ago, 70 years ago, that was the case. In the 60s and 70s, African Americans were sitting in a different place in the bus where they're going into buses and public transportation. We have come a long way as mankind, and we have to believe in our ability to overcome all of this. We are living a much better life today than we've ever lived before in our lives, in spite of the fact that we're still stick to our computers. We do that by choice. It's our choice. So transparency is important. factor, and choice is another important. Freedom is another important factor. Thank you.
Thank
Agreed.
you. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Homistonley. Mr. Homistoner. Yes, there are different views and different opinions actually come in terms of technologies and other things. So what's your opinion?
I'm not understanding your question.
Yes, basically like Dr. Talib as well as Mr. Robs and even Mr. David come up with the different ideas and different views, especially on technology, like how technology actually help our ecosystems, our civilizations and everything. What's your opinion on technology? Is it helpful
Well,
or not? What do you think?
I am the former vice president of the World Futurist Society. I am a futurist by nature. I am an environmentalist and a futurist, and I believe in all points of view. Everybody's has a valid point of view. I think that technology is the linchpin of the 21st century. We're going to be looking at, within 10 years, we're going to see advancements of 40 years. So we have to get used to the technology because it's going to get a lot more dramatic in a very short period of time. As we develop these technologies develop other technologies that basically team other technologies, and they turn into a mushroom cloud of technologies. And if we don't get a handle on it as human beings, we'll be in the shadow. So we have to learn it. We have to educate ourselves on it. We have to tell our children how to live with it. And they know how to live with it more than we do. But
That's
the problem is, like the gentleman was saying before, that the technology is advancing 100 times faster than the human beings that are supposed to be in charge of it. So it's bringing a lot of sociological problems, a lot of problems with adjusting to a much faster, much more information-based lifestyle, which human beings are not used to. And it brings back a whole lot of things like anxiety attacks and stressed out situations and suicidal tendencies. These are all coming from too much at one time. Human beings cannot digest it, live with it, adjust to it, and in that way, technology is a detriment. But I think that human beings, in general, are very, very strong, and they'll learn to adjust to all these things. They always have, and they probably always will. But I think technology is here to stay, and technology is going to grow much more intensely in the future, and we just have to learn to live with it.
Thank you. Professor Donald.
Well, I don't think that technology per se is a problem, because for one thing, I work with deep learning and linguistic analysis, and I can tell you for sure that we are a long way from having AI that has any sort of real intelligence. Even though we know so much more about neuroscience, we don't even really know how to talk about these things. They're so complex. If you work where I do in sociolinguistics, but I want to support one of the things that Talib said and recommend a book by Steven Pinker called "The Better Angels of Our Nature." And Steven Pinker is a social scientist and author that writes popular books that are accessible to regular people. And he shows that the number of wars, the amount of disease, the social fairness, social justice, as Talib was saying, women have the vote, blacks can normally vote, at least in the United States. Everything's getting more equal and more fair, and but it's a tendency. It's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. We're not it's not a straight line. So we look at the one step back and focus on that instead of focusing on the 2 steps forward. To me, I work with startups in Silicon Valley. I mean, I encourage them, and I see the just beauty and brilliance of these young people who have these ideas and dedicate their lives to ideas, making things better for themselves and the world. And I know that that's going on everywhere. I've been to incubators in Finland and Toronto and Austria and Vienna and all over, and met with the people that are working, making those happen. And every place there's these people that are coming up with things that you don't even know, you can't even imagine. I am a judge at a science fair in Silicon Valley, and 8th graders are doing CRISPR. They're genetically modifying bacteria and other things. There's one kid that's trying to make a chicken that glows in the dark. And so you just look at what these people are doing, and they all, most of them have good intentions, and we're gonna find out. It's just like they said, there's going to be there's going to be drawbacks to it. And again, what I said before is, if we can encourage people and make it okay for people to make mistakes, and make it okay for people to try new things, which when you try new things, they aren't all going to work, but it's the new things that are going to make a difference. We're going to keep seeing more jobs. There's going to be different jobs. It's always happened, and it's happening right now. So I think that ultimately we need to encourage optimism, because no one goes out and starts and makes something happen unless they're a little crazy. They're a little bit more optimistic than they should be. And I think that I really agree with Talib about optimism. I'm an optimist, and I definitely encourage it. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. David, because yes, what's your opinion, especially on technology, even though, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I don't want to say that technology is bad. And yeah, Talib, you're completely right that human beings have always been dealing with technology from the Stone Age, creating stone tools till today. What I want to say is that phylogenetic old, we are still nomads. We haven't arrived in a settled area yet. This is also why we are not satisfied in our daily lives. This is from a psychological perspective. With the choice, yeah, I have a choice. I can say, okay, I sell everything, I go to the bush, I live the life I want. But we don't have the choice because we are caught in society. Yeah, I have to gain money, I have to work, and for this, I have to stick to societal rules. So I don't have the choice. I have the choice to say, okay, I want to live there. I want to work in this field. This is my choice. But only of the perspective of a European or of a US citizen. But I think in South America, in Asia or Africa, people are not having this choice to say, I want to work in this area I like. And what I want to add for the downside of technology is an example: plastic. Plastic has brought us a lot of advantages, which are that we can carry stuff easier, that food stuff is not getting bad that fast, but we are not just living with plastic, but we are incorporating plastic. We are breathing plastic, we are eating plastic, we are drinking plastic. Plastic can't be eliminated anymore out of our lives. And plastic has a lot of additives which are making ourselves sick. Yeah, you have bisphenol A, you have phthalates, etc. in plastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Talib.
Thank you so much, David. I think we're not in disagreement at all with each other. What I'm saying here is the following. It's the speed by which change is happening now that is confusing our lives. That's all. But change is a pleasure of life. Change is a must. We cannot live without change anyhow. And plastics, for example. Yes, plastics have destroyed much of our environment. I'm a president of a club called World Ocean Alliance, which is responsible now for picking plastics out of the oceans. Now, what we do as human beings is we create a problem. Yes, create something, we think it's right. Becomes a problem. We solve that problem. We have so many NGOs, we have so many people, so many consciousness about it. I had a visit here in Jordan of a crown prince of one of the Scandinavian countries who refused to be served any plastics when he came on the official visit. That shook up our society completely here. So you have consciousness, that awareness is most important. Awareness, fairness, justice, transparency, and choices are more important values, and they are always in advancing. Technology is just a byproduct of all of this. Technology is a byproduct of our choice, of our freedom, of our ability to do things. So let's look at things in a more global manner, a more comprehensive manner, and see technology, embrace it, try to work with it, not try to reject it, because there's going to be a downside to everything in this life. But this downside can be dealt with eventually. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rob.
We probably should be getting close to wrapping this up. Yeah, I mean, if we look, if we've kind of drifted, I think, on topic a bit because we're supposed to be talking about the pandemic's impact on manufacturing, but talking about plastics in particular, one of the plastics are also a result of the petrochemical market. They're a byproduct of refining, and if we move off petrochemicals, then plastics, by comparison, are going to become a lot more expensive, which they probably should, because we want them out of the environment. In fact, we want most of the stuff that's coming out of the petrochemical market out of the environment. It is doing some pretty horrible things to the planet. What just amazes me, though, is it's only since the electric cars have been rammed forward that we did a ton of work to create a green fuel that doesn't cause any of these problems that could have been implemented had we done the work decades ago. And so at the end, maybe our problem's a little bit too much focus on tactical thinking and not enough focus on strategic thinking and long-term impact of the things that we're doing. Because Talib's right, we've got the capability of solving the problems that we're creating, but maybe it'd be better if we didn't create the damn problems in the first place. Because we can do that, we can develop stuff that is clean and focused. In going back to the idea of jobs, the issue we've got with jobs isn't that we're going to have a whole bunch of people. I mean, put it a different way. Right now, we've got a ton of open positions that nobody can fill because they don't have the people to fill them. In the United States, we are short something like 200,000 long-range truck drivers. We are massively short on computer scientists. We are short on people that understand how to train AIs. We are short on people that understand how to build robots. But we've got a lot of people that an excess of people that can do a lot of the old jobs that we may no longer have. Jobs that people really don't enjoy a heck of a lot out of, like manufacturing line workers. That's not a great job. Much of that's been exported to Asia. But if you look at the living conditions in some of those plants, you wouldn't want that on your worst enemy. I mean, for a period of time, Flextronics was having to put up nets to catch the people that are trying to commit suicide in the plants. That is not good. And in some ways, you point to government and say, okay, that's government not doing its job. When you get to a level of abuse where your workers are committing suicide, you've got a serious problem, and that's a problem at a government level. And of course, it's one of my big complaints with regard to Apple, because I kind of thought they should have stepped in long before any of that stuff happened. But it's a side point. In any case, the underlying goal needs to go back to, we need to be making policy decisions on a strategic agenda, thinking through the long-term impact of what it is we're doing. And the overarching goal should be to make the world a better place. And yeah, okay, you can focus on your country as a priority, but we're all on this planet together. And as Salib pointed out, I think it was Salib that pointed out with regard to the, if it wasn't you, correct me, but with regard to the distribution of antiviruses in countries taking a nationalistic view that they should come first and not recognizing the fact that if you've got large countries that aren't being vaccinated, your problem is not going away. Everybody has to be cured. Otherwise, you've got to shut down travel. And by the way, we have that potential. The Zoom meetings, the kinds of things we're doing right now, a lot of us are now saying that travel is not going to go back to what it once was. The advancements we're making are going to allow a lot of us to travel virtually and not physically. And that may not be a bad thing. I mean, in the end, do you really need to spend, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours on a plane? And planes are hugely polluting. Maybe it would be better for us if we traveled a heck of a lot less. Certainly a lot better for the planet. But we're doing everything ad hoc. We do something over here. We're not thinking about what's happening on the other side. We have to take a holistic approach and start looking at the overall impact of the planet, and then the government providing incentives that allows industry to focus on the things we want the industry to focus on to make the world a better place, rather than prioritizing their own economic benefit. We brought up hedge funds a little earlier. I think Donald brought up hedge funds and the fact that hedge funds have changed. Personally, I like to put hedge funds out of business. They've done a massive amount of damage to the industry by focusing people again on the wrong things. By the way, it's one of the reasons I think Huawei is in the doghouse with the U.S. That's a company that is owned and controlled by its labor union, and that had to scare the holy crap out of hedge funds here in the United States, and put them in automatically in the doghouse. But maybe that's the way companies should be run. Maybe companies should be owned by the workers, so that the focus of the companies is at least partially on the health and well-being of those workers, and we don't have problems like we had in Plextronics with people jumping out of windows. But it requires government to take a look at the big picture and start doing things with a predominant focus on making their country and the world a better place, and a far lower focus on enhancing their own status and power in their government entity. It's a lot of stuff we're doing is upside down and backwards, and if we don't wrap our arms around the problems, we're going to have serious issues that we can't get around. I mentioned the studies of the work we're doing with regard to ethical AI. We've got a real concern that we keep rolling these AIs into critical roles like, say, defense, and not thinking through what our defense is going to be if these things go off the rails. We're going to have a problem because these AIs make decisions in microseconds, and we can't counter that. If you're up against a weapon system that can deliver with pinpoint accuracy ordnance on microseconds, and your defense is human-based, you won't be able to respond in time if that thing goes off the rails. And yet, we're, again, not thinking enough about the defense and thinking too much on the offense. So balance, transparency, and a focus on making the world a better place, it should be a much higher requirement. And if we're going to survive this transition, either individually or collectively, this has got to change. Sorry, I completely wanted to say something. I just
thank you, Rob. I completely agree with you. I just want to say that the industrial age brought in the assembly line and all the workers that we have seen and the conditions that they are working in. Now the age is of self-employment. I think self-employment should be categorized here first, because self-employment is the only way out of the tunnel that we're in, getting ourselves into. But having said this, I want to repeat once again what I said before. Please bear with me. We're getting in a better situation now. Even those that are so much complaining about technology, what they're complaining about is the fast change in their lives. The fast speed of change is much more than human can take. I agree with that. But eventually, humanity will come together, definitely. And let's not forget that this is a path that we're going through. The more important values in life are not just the technology and the material, but the conceptual thing, like fairness, like justice, like transparency, values, equity. These are things that are moving forward. Thank you so much for what you said, Rob. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Homestoner.
We need to start talking about wrapping up. There we're almost at 2 hours.
Yes, exactly. Mr. Homestoner, can you hear me? Yes, we directly go for the concluding remarks from Professor Donalds, Rob, David, and finally Dr. Talib. Mr. Professor Donald, yes.
Well, I appreciate everyone's perspective. I will say that there are models, and I kind of emphasizing what Dr. Talib is saying. There's two aspects to it. When I talk about startups, what I am talking about is self-employment. But what I've said before about the desirability of being able to make mistakes, I think is something that Dr. Talib is saying as well, is that human beings try things and they don't always work. So I appreciate what Rob is saying about having strategic knowledge, but we're constantly running into things that are unanticipated. And that's beautiful. I mean, people are coming up with stuff we just didn't know. I just heard the other day about a chemical way of turning polymers into monomers, which is just a way of actually biodegrading or degrading plastics so that they don't last for all
Yes.
eternity. I also want to say that I understand the dislocation. Again, I keep using Finland as an example because I've lived there and I know a bit about it. And they had a huge problem with suicide as their technology changed. They're a really interesting example because they were an agrarian country before World War II, and then they rapidly became one of the most technological countries in the world. And there were people that were left out. They were farmers. They didn't understand anything that was going on around them, and many of them committed suicide. So at one time, Finland had one of the highest suicide rates in the world. But as a country, they looked at themselves and they said, well, what's going on here? What can we do to help these people? And they started looking at the psychology of it. Like, what is it that we can do to help those people? And now the United States has a much higher suicide rate than Finland does. And that's something that we can always do. And I agree with Dr. Talib that in the end, when we talk about grassroots, the grassroots are within ourselves, being able to desire fairness, to realize that the social structure that David was talking about is natural. Human beings we depend on each other, and we will always have social structure. And in some ways that limits us because we tend to do the same thing that everyone else has done. But the world always changes. Heraclitus knew that. You can't step into the same river twice. And within ourselves, we have to be able to have the optimism that when something goes wrong, we'll find the solution for that thing. And for each of us to be able, as I've said before, to be like Don Quixote and look at chase windmills, and I think that's really
Dream.
what I want to say. Dream, yeah, chase windmills. Look at a world that other people don't see. Be able to do that. And ultimately, we're going to wind up finding the solutions to these things because people are amazing. And all of the people who are listening to this are people, and you are amazing. So thank you.
Yeah.
I always love being on this show.
Thank you. Mr. Rob, what are the concluding remarks?
Well, as everybody has pointed out, we're going through a period of massive change. The pandemic changed a lot of the trajectory of that change, shifted efforts that were focused on one part to automate some parts of businesses to other parts. We now have a massive effort to automate fast foods that wasn't even justifiable before, for instance. And with any change, if you focus too much on the change and how it impacts your life, you're probably going to be unhappy. If you focus much more on where the change is going and you focus on making sure you're there when the change occurs, you probably won't. A lot of us aren't happy because we feel we're out of control, but you can take control. And many of us, I mean, for some folks, it's probably too late. I mean, if you're already laid off and fired, you kind of waited too long, but you can retrain. In my life, I mentioned in the opening the stuff I did for IBM and the rest. But if you think about it, I changed jobs a lot. In fact, before that period of time, I think my wife and I chased each other for how many jobs, very different jobs we had in short periods of time. And if you recognize that it really isn't the job that makes you happy, it's your family, it's how you approach life, it's the level of security that you have, and those things to a large extent are within your control, or can be within your control, if you just focus on fixing the problems, which often is just making sure that you can work through the change and it doesn't surprise you. It's simply a matter of taking control of your life, taking responsibility, and stop blaming others, because it may in fact be their fault, but that's just a waste of effort. And just focus on the problem. As I mentioned before, with this change, a lot of jobs are going to go away. There's no doubt. But a lot of new jobs are being created. I used the example of truck drivers. And earlier on in another session, I pointed out that the truck driving union is very much against autonomous trucks, even though, as I said, we're around 200,000 here in the United States, 200,000 truck drivers short of what we need for long-haul transit, because even at $85,000 a year, nobody wants the job. And with autonomy, the truck drivers become pursers, that they can watch TV. They become security jobs. They become security guards. They become more of a white collar worker than a blue collar worker, and they could actually take classes while the trucks are going. You can't completely take the drivers out of the trucks, because everybody knows that then people will force them off the road and steal from them. So we'll still have people. We'll just fewer people for more trucks. We'll gain more balance, and those jobs will be more fun, more interesting, and even for those drivers that take their families, they could actually have family time while the trucks are driving. It actually could be a much better job than it is now. So rather than focusing on what you're losing, focus a bit more on what you're gaining. And at the end, if you just spend the time understanding what makes you happy, you'll probably find you've got a better path to getting there. But if you don't, you're going to be unhappy with regardless of what change happens. And it'll largely be your own fault. So I guess that's my point. Pandemic has accelerated change. It's coming. Ride the wave or be hit by it.
Mhm. Thank you, Mr. David.
Well, thanks a lot for this lovely discussion. We shifted a bit from the topic. Coming back to it again, I would say, yeah, from the practical side, in the short term, we don't see so much change in the production and manufacturing area. But in the medium term, I think we'll see a lot of change. Why? Because the whole supply chain is being set up. The whole supply chain, which on a global scale has been set up, is not working anymore. And there, I think a tremendous transition will happen. And that's basically it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Homestoner, can you hear me? Sorry. Okay. Dr. Talib, what's the concluding remarks for today?
We lost Holmes. Okay.
Yes.
Now, let me just say again what I want to say here. I agree with David that we're probably still nomads at heart, but we're changing very quickly. Look at the number of people living in cities now. More than 50% of the people of the world now are living in cities. And COVID has done a tremendous change to us. COVID is an opportunity for us, I think, as human beings, if we think about it this way. In the Chinese language, I always say this. In Chinese language, the word crisis and the word opportunity are one word. They don't use two different words. Because there's an opportunity that can come out of every crisis. And we have learned so much out of COVID, David. I think now with regard to suicide rates and being unhappy, now I doubt that people are committing more suicides now than they used to do in the past. I doubt that. We simply did not have statistics in the past. Now we know exactly what's going on. We have data. We didn't have data before. So even if people are not happy with their lives now, but you have to look at the bright side of things always. I'm a very optimist myself. And I always say that COVID has brought to me so many good lessons. I'm enjoying my family now. I'm sitting here at my home, waking up every morning at ease, I don't have to rush every morning and shave, put on my clothes and shower in 10 minutes to get to work. That's not anymore the case. Now you have to start enjoying things like that. Because with COVID, we're not going to go back to things the way we are. We're not going to go back to become nomads again, David. We are going to go into a new reality, a new world. COVID is changing us completely. There is a new norm. Anybody that says that things are going to go back the way they are when the pandemic is over is mistaken. This pandemic has come to uncover some of the faults and the shortcomings of our systems. And we're not going to go back to that, even with travel and tourism. Now, for example, people are not going to travel more in masses. This concept of over tourism, for example, being in crowd places is not going to be the case anymore. So we are going to learn so much out of this. Just to bring us back to the issue of COVID. COVID has been a blessing to those that want to see it this way. Let's look at the bright side of it. Please. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you for joining today and today's session. Actually really great sessions. We learn a lot about technology, about supply chain, about manufacturing industry, and especially what will happen next 10 to 20 years. I think all of the university from Asia Pacific, school, college from Asia Pacific, from Malaysia, from Indonesia, from China, even from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, those who observe our show, please share, because we have the great panelists. We have our great politicians, Dr. Talib. We have our great analyst, Mr. Rob. We have our great consultant, Mr. David. We have our great professor, Professor Donalds. So I'm sure from this type of content, you can learn a lot. Even the not only the academician, even from the industry people, even the think tank and the government and the planning ministries, even Prime Minister office, regularly they are communicating with World Talent Economy forums. You get a great guidelines, and by this way we can solve many problems, and we need expert support. World Talent Economy Forum has many experts like today's panelists, many like advisors, many speakers, many mentors. So from May, we are starting our academy as well as our summit, and by this way, we will reach around 100 million people. What Dr. Talib said, the grassroots level, from the beginning, the World Talent Economy Forum, we are trying to reach 100 million people. Already, we are collaborating with 5 million people in Asia Pacific, especially the youth community. So hopefully by this kind of policy dialogue, roundtable discussion, we will solve our social and economical problem. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for all of your support and everything for World Talent Economy Forum. Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
David. Thank you, David.
Thanks a
Don,
lot.
Rob. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Always nice to see all of you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye
Bye.
bye.